Well, hey, welcome to Live Church. So appreciate you guys. Everybody has been asking me, why are you all dressed up and snazzy today? And I just thought, for all of you guys, the remnants that decided to risk your lives to come to church this morning, I just want to dress up for you, okay? I just want to show you that I got mad props and respect for you, that you made it out and that you braved the storm, that you all are here and alive, all right? So, hey, for those of you just joining us, maybe this is your first week or maybe this is your second week, the church is in the middle of a time of prayer and fasting. It's been an amazing time. God's already doing amazing things. The stories are already coming in, and we're only a third of the way through this process so far. Really encourages me as a pastor to see how many people are taking this really seriously, how families have come together and they've come up with a plan and they're sticking to it. I really am encouraged by that, and I think that that really speaks to the fact that this body is ready for the next season and what God is ushering us into, or maybe we're not ready, but we're willing to get ready. And so I'm really thankful that you guys are taking it seriously and jumping into this. Just want to give you a heads up as somebody that's walked through one of these before. This is the part of the journey where it gets a little bit more tempting to justify jumping off the bandwagon and cheating a little bit. Maybe you have already a little bit. So I want to encourage you, don't give up. Get back on the train. It's still moving forward, okay? Don't beat yourself up. There's no shame or condemnation built into this. We're reaching out. This is my metaphorically reaching out to you, grabbing your hand, pulling you on the train. Let's finish well, okay? What's at stake is too big to not push through. God's spoken. He wants to bring revival and a reformation of truth to His church, and I believe that many of you in this room have a role to play in that, and we need God to get us ready for that. Today, I want to talk to you guys about something that is really important. Today, I want to talk to you guys about slavery mentality. And today we're going to spend our time talking about what that is, and then we're going to talk about the three primary behaviors that come out of slavery mentality. We're going to jump into the text, and the best example in the text for slavery mentality is found in the Exodus, the Israelites' exodus out of Egypt. And so we're going to jump in Exodus chapter 3. But before we do that, I need to give you a little bit of background. If any of you are familiar a little bit with the Bible, the book of Genesis, at the end of the book, there's this guy by the name of Joseph. Okay, he's the great-grandson of Father Abraham, had many sons. Okay, so you have Abraham, you have Isaac, you have Jacob, and then you have Joseph. So Joseph is the Technicolor Dreamcoat guy. All right, and then he follows the Lord through obedience, and what he does is he ends up saving his whole family and his whole nation, the Israelites, from the famine that comes. He has to bring him into Egypt in order to do so. Well, some time has passed by. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that's what they call their POTUS, Pharaoh. Pharaoh has died. There's a new Pharaoh in charge, and Joseph has died. And what's happened is for 400 years, the Israelites have been hanging out in Egypt, maybe longer than that. One day, Pharaoh starts to look around, and he sees all the Israelite people, and he notices that they have been fruitful and multiplied. Because when you don't have cable TV, so they've been fruitful and they've multiplied, and there's a lot of them. And he thought, okay, if one day these guys wake up and they see how many of them are there, they're going to try to overthrow us and potentially leave, and we don't want that to happen. And so what he did is he enacted and put them into slavery. It was a way for him to get free labor out of the deal, and it was a way to oppress them, take their strength away. He also ordered that the newborn males be thrown into the Nile River. Consequently, one of the Hebrew moms of the Israelites decided to save her baby, put the baby in a secure location. Ironically, Pharaoh's own daughter found the baby, decided she was going to raise the baby as her own child, named him Moses. Moses, as he grew up, he inherently knew that he was a Hebrew. He knew he was an Israelite, even though he was being raised in an Egyptian household. And then one day, God shows up, and he gives a promise to Moses, telling them that he's going to be a leader that's going to lead the Israelites up out of slavery, up out of bondage with the Egyptians. Here's what he says in Exodus chapter 3, verse number 16. He says, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivitites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, I'll be honest with you. The combination of putting milk and honey together doesn't sound very good until you're on a fast. And then everything sounds good. This week, I was sitting there working, and a bug started crawling across my desk. And normally, I would just swat and kill the bug. But this time, I kind of stared at it for a little bit, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but my saliva gland started producing something, and I started wondering, what would that bug taste like? There are certain cultures that eat bugs. They're delicacies. I wonder what that little guy would taste like in my mouth right now, and all the protein it would give me fasting problems. So here you go. And so what happens? Moses gives this promise, or God gives this promise to Moses. So Moses goes up to Pharaoh, and he says what? Let my people go. Moses says no. So God sends 10 miraculous plagues against the Egyptians and against Pharaoh. Pharaoh finally says, I've had enough. Moses, you leave, and you take all your people with you. And so here comes all these people, all the Israelites, they're leaving. Now you have to, for 400 years, they've been in slavery. For 400 years. This is all they ever known. This is all their dads ever knew. This is all their grandpappies ever knew. This is all their great-grandpappies ever knew, was slavery, was bondage. It's all they ever knew. And all of a sudden, they're just free. Free. Could you imagine that party? Walking up out of that place, we're going to get some milk. We're going to get some honey. That's a party. Like, you don't walk out of that place going, God's good. And they're rocking that joint. They're leaving the Egyptians. They're leaving slavery, and God has promised them their own land. Trumpets blaring, having a good time. And then they walk out into the wilderness. It's like, all right, God, what do we got? Like 5 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left, turn around 3 times, put your left foot in, put your left foot out, and then we're there? There's almost this anticipation sometimes in our lives when God gives us a promise that it's going to happen right away. But it doesn't happen. Verse 17. It so happened that after Pharaoh released the people, God didn't lead them by the road through the land of Philistines, which was the shortest route. Now on this map right up here, this is the expected route that the Exodus took. Over here on the left is where they came out of Egypt. Right up in the upper right where the red course ends, that's Canaan. That's the promised land where they ended up. As you notice, they kind of took the long way there. Right up on top, if you guys go to the next slide, there is a pathway that leads through Philistia, by the Philistines. That is obviously the best path. It's the shortest, it's the most direct. They would have cut their time down to a fraction of what it was. So why did God lead them all the way around the easiest, shortest path? Well, he answers that question in verse number 17. He says, for God thought, if the people encounter war, they'll change their minds and go back to Egypt. That's important. I'm going to read it again. If the people encounter war, they'll change their minds and they'll go back to Egypt. So God led the people on the wilderness road, looping around to the Red Sea. The Israelites left Egypt, this is key, in military formation. The Israelites came out of Egypt ready to fight. On the outside, and even to themselves, they were ready to take on any opposition they came across. They knew as they were traveling to the Promised Land, they were going to come across groups of people they were going to have to defeat and take over. They were ready to fight. They're marching. They're not just partying. They're marching out of Egypt because they're ready to take on what God has for them. But God knew something about them, about their heart, that they weren't ready yet. They didn't know, and on the outside, they looked like they were ready to take on the world, but God knew something they didn't, and that was that they still had slavery mentality. The first primary behavior to slavery mentality is this: retreat, blame, and repeat. Retreat, blame, and repeat. The first sign of slavery mentality is someone who constantly retreats from challenges and obstacles, blames others for their failures and their lack of faith, and then repeats the cycle over and over and over again. The Israelites may have marched out of there in military formation, but those jokers weren't ready for any conflict. God made them take the long road around conflict and around the war, not because he's a jerk, but because of his grace. If they would have stepped into conflict, if they would have stepped into war at that moment, they would have either been crushed or, as God said, they would have went back and retreated back to slavery in Egypt again. There are some of you in this room that are frustrated because God birthed a dream in your heart. He gave you a promise. He put something in front of you, a calling, if you will, and it hasn't come to fruition yet. It hasn't been delivered yet. And you feel like you are on the longest destination, the longest path to that promise. You feel like you are perpetually in a season of waiting. When God birthed that dream in your heart, wherever it was, you came out storming the gates out of Egypt in military formation. I'm going to take on the world. When I was 16 years old, I was a new Christian, 6 months old in Jesus. God called me into full-time ministry. When you're 16 and you're called into full-time ministry, you're going to be a youth pastor until you're 99. You don't ever want to grow up to be one of those old guys that lead the church. You walk out and you have this military formation. It's time to go. I'm ready to preach. I'm ready to teach Sunday school. I'm ready to take on the world. I'm ready to lead a youth camp. I'm ready to do all these things. And then your dedication and your commitment and your fire to that promise fell flat because it didn't happen right away. You got discouraged, you got distracted, and you let the enemy take you out of your game. My friends, the wilderness and the delay is not a punishment. It's meant to be an intense boot camp training because you ain't ready yet. Listen, God wants to unload huge, massive blessing on your life. And if all you're thinking of right now is money, please stop. Like, it's not just money. That's part of it, but it's so much bigger than that. He wants to unload massive blessing on your life. He wants to empower you with gifts, amazing gifts, empower you with His Spirit to make a big impact, an impact that you could never even dream or comprehend on your own. He wants to put so much of His Spirit in you that there's a transformation work of God everywhere you go. And whenever you go into your workplaces, into your schools, into your churches, into your communities, that transformation power is felt. And there's something about you that draws them to you because God's Spirit and presence follows you everywhere you go. That you don't have to stand up and scream at people to come to know Jesus, that they automatically go, man, there's something about you. You have so much good inside of you. Where does that, you have so much joy inside of you. Where does that come from? And as the potter makes the clay, he had a plan from you as the master potter. He had a plan from you from the very beginning to form you into exactly what he wanted you to be. He designed you perfectly. You are not a mistake. You are a masterpiece. And sometimes you have to take the long way. Because if God gave you everything that He wanted to give you in your life right now, it would crush you. How many of you would agree with me? It is a terrible parenting decision to hand a big tub of Halloween candy to a 4-year-old and just say, eat what you want. They've not yet reached the point where they can monitor, where they can make sure that they're not sitting here going, well, I'm stepping on the scale tomorrow, so I'm just going to eat this one. They're not at that point where they do that. If I handed Grayson a tub of Halloween candy, it'd all be gone. He'd be sick the next day, and then he wouldn't have any candy for a year. Because that's the only Halloween's where we replenish. You make them wait because it's what's good for them. God makes you wait because it's what's good for you. God made the Israelites wait because he foresaw their slavery mentality. Their slavery mentality was this: they had not yet broken from their physical and spiritual dependence on their old masters, the Egyptians. We see their slavery mentality manifest itself in their first opposition. Because this is what opposition does in your life. It shows you who your master is. What do you turn to when things get tough? Do you turn to God or do you turn to food? That one's for me. Do you turn to God or do you turn to someone else? Do you turn to God or do you turn to something that gives you comfort? What do you do? Because opposition reveals your master. Exodus chapter 10. As Pharaoh approached, okay, so here's what's happened at this point. Pharaoh is watching all of his free labor force just walking out of town. Whoop, changed my mind. Go get him, boys. Either kill him out there or bring him back. And so here come the Egyptians chasing them down. So as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here in the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'?" Liars. "It would have been much better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Guess who knew this was going to happen? God. The first time they face opposition, they want to retreat. And then they blame Pastor Moses on all of their lack of faith. Here's a good question. Why in 600,000 people? Why was there not one person that raised their fist and say, "Let's fight"? Not one. 600,000 people. You know that group's at least got one crazy guy. You know that guy, you work with him, he's in your church. That guy that is just always looking for a fight. Always looking for a fight. Why in 600,000 people did not one person go, "Let's fight"? It's the same reason why when they were in slavery, not one of them looked around and said, "You know what? I think we got the numbers to overtake them and leave." The reason why they didn't want to fight, the reason why the Israelites didn't want to fight the Egyptians is because slaves don't fight their masters. We have the benefit of hindsight. Thousands of years of hindsight, 5,000 foot over. We know how the story begins. We know how the story ends. We even hear New Testament scripture that teaches on this particular story. We are in the best position to see things the way God saw it back during that time. But you have to understand, the Israelites didn't have hindsight. They didn't have hindsight. All they ever knew was slavery to the Egyptians. And even though it doesn't make sense to us, even though we know it was toxic for them and it was abusive for them, it was dangerous for them, there was a level of comfort that they still found in those people. So when they saw those people coming up over the hill, we look at it from our hindsight perspective and we say, "Guys, the enemy's coming. Run or fight. Do something. They're coming, the bad guys." But when they saw them coming up over the hill, it was an old friend. It was an old friend. And that leads us to behavior number 2 of slavery mentality. It's hard to say goodbye to your old chain. That old sin, that old habit, that old attitude, that old behavior is going to feel like an old boyfriend or that college girlfriend. Man, they wore that cologne that you like. They did their hair in a way that you really liked. You're supposed to get married. her dad liked your dad, and they went golfing together, and every time the family would get together, everybody rooted for the Chiefs, and it was awesome. It was a match made in heaven. You guys, you were searching for rings, and every time you'd walk through the mall holding hands the whole time, you'd go into the ring store. You like this one? No. You like this one? And you just went through all that, and you were planning what the reception would look like, and what kind of house you would live in, and what your cat and your dog would look like. Like, this was a match made in heaven. This is the way it was supposed to go. You loved each other. Maybe you even enjoyed the thrill of holding secrets together that nobody else knew. It was a relationship of comfort. It was a profound, it was a perceived fulfillment that you found in this relationship, even though this relationship was toxic, abusive, and it was wrecking your life. Even though it came to wreck your marriage, even though it was pulling you further and further away from God, even though it came and it stole your joy, it came to rip your family apart, and it came to destroy your soul and send it into hell. As toxic and as abusive as that old sin or that old habit or that old behavior, your old self used to be, it's still your old friend. And breaking up is hard to do. But when you break up with that scrub, it's going to be sad. Because scrub is a guy who doesn't get no love from me, sitting on the passenger side of his best friend's ride trying to holler at me. When you break up with that scrub, it's going to be sad and it's going to hurt. You're going to find yourself sometime in the middle of an afternoon, sometime with you got Creed music playing in the background. You've dimmed the lights in the living room, and you're sitting there on the couch, and you're crying about everything, and then you bring out the phone, and you pull his name up in the directory, and it's like, even his name is cute. And then you're scanning through the directory, and you see the button at the bottom that says call, and you hover your finger above your finger hovers above the button. If I just call them, they probably won't answer. I'll just leave a voicemail. What all of us need in our lives is that friend that will sit beside us on that couch, look over, it's called accountability, look over and see that we have our old friend pulled up on our phone, slap the phone out of her hand and say, girl, we're going to the mall. We all need a friend that will walk beside us and not let us go back to where we came from. It's hard to say goodbye. Dump her, dump him. It may be all that you ever knew, but God has something so much better for you. We humans are funny because sometimes we prefer darkness over freedom just because it's familiar. Here's what the Israelites are saying. I'd rather return to my previous state of bondage and slavery, because every day that they would serve me bottom of the barrel Long John Silver reject fish and vegetables that was on its way to the trash can anyway, pay me nothing, make me work all day with ridiculous work quotas, that when I didn't meet it, they would beat me. And sometimes they would just beat me because for no reason at all. Well, I'm sitting around here in this country and I see my family and my people getting pushed around like a bunch of punks for no reason at all. I'd rather go back to that than face a temporary series of challenges and obstacles issued by the one true God, all meant to teach me a lesson, grow me up so I can reach the ultimate destination of a land flowing with everything that I could ever want, a land where I'm free, where my people are free, and we can establish ourselves as a nation. He can be our God, we can be His people, and we could reign forevermore. I would rather go back to slavery than go into freedom, because slavery is familiar, but freedom is unmarked territory. Sometimes our past looks so much sweeter because it's all we know. Where do we go? How do you find freedom? Freedom doesn't have an address. It's a journey that you take with God. So here's what happens. They're coming over the men. Moses turns around and says, God, would you deliver us? And many of you know the story. What happens? Like my sound effects. And the sea split, and then the Israelites went across the sea on dry ground. Think about that for a second. The ground wasn't wet from where the water was just there. It was dry. Like, that's part of the miracle. God made the ground dry. It's like, I don't even want your feet to get muddy. So they go across the ground, and then the Egyptians, they were walking like an Egyptian, and God hardened their heart, and they went across on dry ground with them. So when the Israelites got on the other side, what happened? God said, boom, and the waters came down and crushed their old friend. Now again, as we watch this story, we're like, You know what I'm talking about. Chiefs, when the Chiefs playing tonight, y'all, some of y'all are going to be standing up doing the same thing. Go, go, go. The Patriots are the enemy. Go. The bad guy got taken out. We get excited. But I can imagine in that community, there was some grieving. There was some grieving. It's sort of the effect of a domestic abuse victim. Whenever they go through a scenario where their perpetrator finally gets incarcerated, they grieve. Everybody outside the situation says, you're a fool. Look, the jerk's in jail. It's over. You're free now. But the victim grieves because it's all they ever knew. And they go and they see them and they call them and they try to reacclimate. It's like an ex-con that spent so much time in prison. It's all they ever knew. And then when they get back out into society, they have trouble reacclimating because it's not familiar to them. They even have systems and things to help them, but sometimes they end up committing another crime to go back to prison because that's where they feel comfortable, in chains. They don't know how to handle freedom. They don't know. They're scared of freedom. So they go back in chains, even though it's toxic. Exodus chapter 14, verse 31. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That was your part. And they put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Progress, not complete progress, not even as much progress as you would expect, but we have progress. Our new master has now just crushed our old master, never to rise again. Breaking slavery mentality is not easy, but God is teaching them, I'm your new master. Your dependency comes from me now. You don't need to be physically or spiritually dependent upon your old master. I'm your new master. This is the essence of slavery mentality. Failing to exchange the little predictable comforts of today with a promised land that requires taking risk, embracing unpredictability, facing opposition, and putting your trust in God. That's slavery mentality. I'd rather stay where I was in bondage than step into freedom. Behavior number 3 of slavery mentality is a refusal to abandon national culture for kingdom. Refusal to abandon national culture for kingdom. So I want you guys to throw up that map for me again real quick. The Israelites finally make it to Mount Sinai, down here at the bottom. Mount Sinai is the location that God had ordained that he would give the nation of Israel their law. He was now their POTUS. They needed a law as a nation, as a people. So this is where they arrive so God can give them their constitution, the 10 Commandments, and the rest of the law. So they show up as expected. Moses goes up Mount Sinai. Everybody else stays on the bottom. He's up there for a long time, 40 days and 40 nights. While he was gone, you could say that all hell broke loose down at camp. Exodus chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, the second in charge, and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing. Now, there's a lot to this because everybody probably had a lot of jewelry. That was the Egyptian culture. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Again, hindsight, we look at this and we think, you morons. 40 days and you're going to worship that in comparison to the guy that split the sea, that sent the 10 supernatural plagues, who's dropping manna from heaven, busting out water from a rock, and you're going to worship that? You bunch of dumb idiots. What's wrong with you? Again, we don't have hindsight. We have hindsight. They don't. I want to step into their shoes once again because I think once we do, you'll figure out we're just like them. You see, they just came from a culture where there were so many gods to worship. It was a pluralistic religious culture. They had formed the habit of merging, as actually acceptable social behavior, to merge other religious beliefs with your own. So if you had a neighbor that came over and said, well, this is my God and this is my God, now, we'll bring them on in, we'll put them on the dinner table, they'll be our gods too. Religion was like a buffet. Well, I like a little bit of what this God has to say. I like a little bit of what this God has to say, so I'm going to take a little bit of this one over here. I need a little Buddha in my life, a little bit of Muhammad on this side, a little bit of Krishna is all I need. I don't know why I do that. I don't know why I do that. This was what was expected. That if you were a person that says, I worship one God, well, you're not open-minded and inclusive. Sound familiar? There was not one true God. There were many gods. So let's just mix them all together in a pot and let's have a big party around them because that's all they ever knew. That's all the Israelites ever knew growing up in the Egyptian culture. Not to mention the man-made idols that they turned into gods. Money, gold, things, people, sex, clothing, popularity, ourselves. And here we are. Here's the Israelites. Every nation that they knew had visible gods. They all handcrafted visible gods. Everybody else has visible gods. Why can't we? Make us one, Aaron, so that we may have sex parties around it. That's what they did. Those were fun. Then look what happens next. This is fascinating. Gives me goosebumps. Verse 5. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf, and he announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. Did you get it? It's subtle. Let me read it again. Tomorrow there will be a festival to who? That's not a typo up there. It's a capital L, which in Scripture means it's talking about Yahweh. It's talking about Jehovah God, the Lord of hosts, our God. Notice they didn't make an idol to replace their worship of God. They made an idol to worship alongside God. They made an idol that they were still honoring God, they thought. We're still worshiping the Lord. We're still worshiping our new master. What could be wrong? We just made a gold calf, and this is what we do. We just make a new God every time we want to. We merge all of our beliefs together. This is how we do. What's wrong with that? What's the big deal? We're just doing what we've always done. We're just doing what culture tells us is acceptable and good and right. We're still including Yahweh. What's the big deal? Oh, but my friend. Oh, my friend. Our God does not share. His name's Lou, by the way. Our God does not share. There is no other God. Not even close. Our new master is a jealous God. He's the only God. Do you remember the plagues? All 10 plagues were a display of power that made their little gods seem like fools. Do you remember the sea being split in half and an entire army going across on dry ground? That's our God. He wants no other God in front of him. He wants no other God beside him. He wants no other God even close behind him. Because he is above all, and there is nothing even close. He is the only one true God. And in that culture, as well as today, it's not popular to walk around and say that there's one belief system that is right. Because when you say that, you're a bigot, and you're not inclusive, you're not open-minded, because what you're saying is everything else is wrong. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it's not acceptable. We're in the Bible Belt. We're in the middle of everything. And so we're 10 years behind what's happening in other places of the country where they're shutting down billboards, house churches, changing tax codes. But our God is not a God made of man-made materials fashioned with man's hands. He made man. He's not a God of gold and statues. He created gold, and he gave man the artistic ability to be able to artistically create statues. He's the invisible spirit God, and he reigns above all. And people may mock you for having an invisible God, but you stand. People may mock you for sacrificing so much for something you can't see, but you stand. And people will throw verbal and maybe someday, in some way, physical stones at you for fearing God more than man, but you stand. Because there is no one like my God. No one. There's no God that goes alongside him, no God that goes before him. He is the only one. He's always been the only one. So my question to you this morning is this. Who or what is your master? Who or what is your master? What is that thing in your life that when God asks you to step up, it keeps you retreating? What is that thing in your life that keeps you justifying your behavior and blaming your lack of faith and your failure on somebody else? What is that thing in your life that's been hard to say goodbye to? That old chain that feels more like a friend than a chain? And what is that thing in your life that you have set beside God and said, I'll worship both? That God, I will serve you so long that it doesn't touch my pocketbook. That I will serve you so long that it doesn't touch my time. That I will serve you so long as God that you don't make me uncomfortable where I'm at. What is that God that you have brought beside? What is that thing that you brought beside God and said, I will worship both? I mean, the easy answer is we could all say sin, but I want you to call it what it is by its name. It likes to hide in darkness. It likes to hide in shadows. It likes to dodge you in generalities. It's not a word. Is it pride? Is it because it will harm your this notion that you've put out, this person that you've put out in front of people, this holier than thou type of thing? Is it money? That God, you can have all of me, you just can't have that. You can't have control over that. Is it what people think? Do you fear if you do something radical for Jesus, everybody look at you like a cray? Is it fear? Because you fear freedom more than you fear going back to bondage. Is it apathy? I'm just kind of doing this church thing because I'm hoping to punch my ticket into heaven and just get by. God has so much more to unlock for you. Is it wrath? What is that thing in your life that you have not forgiven or gotten past? Who has hurt you that you have not forgiven and letting go? Sexual immorality. That you can never step up to what God has for you because there's always a little hidden secret in your life that's keeping you quiet and holding you back, disqualifying you. Is it some false identity that someone gave you or you assigned to yourself? That you believed a lie, that you're not good enough, that you're not called? Is it food? Is it comfort? God, I can't do that thing. I don't like to be discomforted. Is it work? Some of you, are you burying your heads in work to find value in identity? All the while jerking your responsibilities at home and being a good dad and being a good husband. Because you think if I could just succeed at this one thing, it will mask everything else I'm not doing well at. And that's where I will find my identity. What is it? Come on. What is that thing that if everyone else saw it coming, they would look at it and say, the enemy. But when you see it coming, it's an old friend. Guys, before we'll be able to step into the promised land, our promised land, we must be free from slavery mentality. Have to be. That's why God will withhold some of what he wants to give, because we ain't ready yet. And part of this fast is to uproot the slavery mentality. That physical and spiritual connection and dependence upon our old master. God said, I will not share the throne with anybody in your life. Nobody. Here's what we're going to do. This is going to be different from last week. We're not going to come back up and exchange them. But I'm going to ask the ushers if they would go ahead and grab the prayer cards. I way ordered too many prayer cards, but it ends up being for a reason. On these cards, they're going to pass them out, and we're going to try to get you as many pins as we can. I want you to write down the name of the old friend, the old master, maybe the current master that needs to become an old master. Because what we're going to do during this next song is after you've written it down and you've given it to the Lord and you've said, you're my new master, I want you to come and lay it face down just up here on the stage. Again, we're not going to exchange these, so I know what you're writing is incredibly deep and personal. You don't put your name on them. Just write down your old master, and I want you to lay him on the stage as a semblance to you that you're leaving it at the foot of the cross and that you're serving a new master. Don't do this if it's just for show. Do it if there's something in your life that is your master, an idol that you put alongside God that you need to dethrone today. Not tomorrow, today.